They left me with a pile of laundry. I spent the day. Discovering the truth when the front door finally opened. Their smiles vanished. No one was ready. But it was on the table. Before we dive in, tell me, which city are you listening from? It was early Saturday morning in Portland, Oregon. The sun had just spilled golden light across the kitchen floor, highlighting the faint aroma of brewed coffee. Clara, the mother-in-law, stood at the entrance of the living room, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. Her daughter-in-law, Emily, had left in a hurry, suitcase in hand, and her teenage son, Lucas, was still scrolling on his phone, oblivious to the tension in the air. The laundry basket sat like a silent accusation in the middle of the hallway. Towels, robes, and soft spa slippers spilled over the sides, as if daring Clara to take action. She inhaled deeply, her mind calculating each possibility. This wasn't just about clothes. It was about control, boundaries, and respect, things Clara had spent decades teaching, only to watch them be ignored. Her gaze flicked toward the kitchen table, where a small, cream-colored envelope rested among the mail and receipts. Something told her this was the key. She didn't rush. She never did. Patience had always been her weapon, and today it would be her ally. Minutes stretched into silence, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Clara began sorting the laundry methodically, each fold precise, each garment a reminder of her diligence. Yet her mind remained on that envelope. She remembered the subtle comments, the passive exclusions, and the way her daughter-in-law had treated her like a background character in her own home. And now, finally, the stage was set. What awaited her in that envelope could change everything. But she didn't let herself think too far ahead. One step at a time. One fold at a time. The doorbell rang. Clara paused, her hand hovering over a robe. Who could it be? A neighbor? Or perhaps someone delivering groceries? No, the timing felt deliberate. Someone knew she would be here, waiting. She straightened her back, wiped her hands on a towel, and walked toward the door, her heart steady but alert. What Clara didn't yet realize was that this morning would mark the first time the household understood that she wasn't just quietly watching anymore. She had noticed everything. Every slight, every assumption, every moment of entitlement. And today, her presence alone would speak louder than words ever could. Clara opened the front door slowly, expecting maybe a package or a neighbor's cheerful hello. Instead, she found herself staring at an unexpected visitor. A man in a crisp suit holding a clipboard. His name tag read Richard. Home Services. He smiled politely, unaware of the tension simmering just behind Clara's calm exterior. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm here for the scheduled inspection," he said. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. Inspection? At this hour? She hadn't scheduled anyone. Something didn't sit right, but she let him step inside, nodding politely. The house smelled faintly of lavender from the air fresheners Emily always insisted on using. A smell that once felt welcoming but now only reminded Clara of the small manipulations that had piled up over the past months. She noticed the slippers she had folded earlier were slightly out of place, as if someone had been moving them while she wasn't looking. Richard began his work meticulously, checking vents and smoke detectors, flipping through notes as he went. Clara didn't interfere. She watched quietly, noting every detail. She had learned long ago that patience and observation often revealed more than confrontation ever could. As he reached the kitchen, Clara's eyes immediately went to the envelope on the table. It hadn't moved. Her heartbeat quickened, but her expression remained calm. Emily had clearly left something behind. Something meant to be discovered or perhaps to test her. Richard glanced at the envelope curiously. "Do you want me to check this for any issues?" he asked. Clara shook her head, her voice steady. No, thank you. That's personal. Once Richard moved to the living room, Clara approached the table slowly. The envelope felt heavier than she expected in her hand. She ran her fingers over the smooth paper, noticing the subtle indentations from a pen that had written far too many words without her seeing them. Her intuition screamed that this was more than just mail. Behind her, the house remained silent except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. She remembered the way Emily had insisted she handle errands. The small dismissive remarks about chores. The way Lucas seemed completely oblivious. But Clara had noticed it all. Every slight, every assumption of control over her own home. She opened the envelope carefully, pulling out a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Emily's neat, precise script, but the words inside made Clara's stomach tighten. Charges she hadn't authorized. Items she hadn't given permission for. And a small note hinting that the house itself might no longer be hers to control. Clara's eyes narrowed, but she breathed deeply, recalling her decades of experience handling tricky situations. Anger would do nothing. Hasty reactions would only give them power. She set the envelope aside, already formulating the plan she had been silently building in her mind for weeks. This morning, she realized, wasn't just another Saturday. It was the first day her quiet observation would transform into deliberate action. And by the end of it, she intended for everyone in the house to understand one simple truth. Clara was no longer a background character in her own home. The envelope still lay on the kitchen table as Clara moved toward the living room, her steps deliberate. Lucas was still on his phone, scrolling lazily through messages, unaware that the calm surface of their home was about to shift. Clara's eyes met the framed family photos on the wall, smiles frozen in time reminding her that appearances could be deceiving. She picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number, her fingers steady despite the rising tension in her chest. On the other end, Daniel, her late husband's longtime friend and neighbor, answered within seconds. Clara, everything all right? His voice was calm, almost protective. I need your help, she said simply. Nothing can wait. While Daniel was on his way, Clara opened the envelope fully, scanning the paper inside. Each line of Emily's meticulous handwriting revealed transactions and plans that were far too bold, even for someone who had previously dismissed her. Designer purchases, unexplained subscriptions, and small notes hinting at decisions being made without her consent. It wasn't just thoughtlessness. It was entitlement, and it had been building for months. As she folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, a faint sound drew her attention to the front door. A car engine hummed outside, a familiar black sedan pulling into the driveway. Daniel had arrived. Clara's heart didn't race, but a sense of anticipation hung in the air. This wasn't fear. It was readiness. Daniel stepped inside, holding two coffees and a small notebook. You called me? He asked quietly, placing the items on the counter. Clara nodded, keeping her eyes on the table where the envelope waited. Show me, he said simply, and she handed it over. Minutes passed as they discussed quietly, words measured and deliberate. Strategy was necessary. Patience was their ally. Daniel's presence brought a quiet reassurance. He understood the history, the stakes, and the home itself. Every corner of the house held memories. Every wall carried the echoes of years of care. They weren't about to let entitlement and arrogance dismantle what had been built with love and dedication. By the time they finished, a plan was forming. Clara wasn't just going to react. She was going to act deliberately, ensuring that every step she took would be controlled, precise, and undeniable. The envelope, with its revelations, would not be ignored. It would become the first piece of clarity in a house that had long been dominated by assumptions. Outside, the morning sun cast long shadows across the porch, as if signaling that a quiet reckoning was about to begin. Clara folded her hands over the envelope, her expression calm yet unwavering. Today marked the first chapter in a change that no one in the household would forget. By late morning, Clara had organized the kitchen and living room with precision, every detail under her watchful eye. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if measuring the space itself, noting each misplaced item and the faint traces of Emily's morning hurry. The house was quiet now, almost holding its breath, as if sensing the shift in control. Lucas wandered into the kitchen, yawning and rubbing his eyes. "Mom, who's here?" he asked casually, noticing Daniel sitting at the counter with a notepad. Clara didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, feeling the subtle tension grow. Lucas frowned slightly, sensing something he couldn't name. Emily had been gone for hours, but the house still carried her presence. Towels scattered in the laundry, the faint smell of her perfume lingering near the front hall, and the cream envelope sitting, untouched on the kitchen table, an unspoken message, waiting to be discovered. Clara's gaze returned to it. She had decided not to open it fully in front of anyone yet. Patience would give her power. Daniel sipped his coffee, eyes flicking between Clara and the envelope. "You know what you're doing, right?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded. Her hands rested calmly on the counter, but her mind was running through every scenario she could anticipate. The entitlement, the assumptions, the subtle dismissals, they had all piled up. And now she intended for them to be acknowledged, clearly and unmistakably. A knock at the door made both of them pause. Clara's brow lifted, a quiet recognition in her eyes. It was Emily returning earlier than expected. The click of the front door and the soft shuffle of her slippers announced her presence. Before she even spoke, she hummed a light tune, carrying a tote bag, oblivious to the quiet tension that had settled like a fog over the kitchen. Clara didn't flinch. She simply looked at the envelope on the table, then back at Emily, her expression steady. "You're back earlier than I expected," she said calmly. Emily smiled faintly, dropping the tote by the counter. "Oh, I just thought I'd beat the traffic." "Laundry done yet?" Clara's gaze never wavered. "Everything's taken care of," she said softly, letting the words linger in the air. There was no warmth, no resentment, only the subtle weight of authority she had reclaimed silently over the past hours. Emily tilted her head, frowning slightly. "Everything," she repeated, her tone casual but edged with curiosity. Clara picked up the envelope, placing it deliberately in the center of the table. The paper seemed to pulse with its own presence, as if carrying the unspoken truths of months past. "Open it when you're ready," Clara said. The words were calm, almost neutral, but they carried an unmistakable gravity. Emily hesitated, her smile faltering slightly. Lucas watched from the side, confused, feeling the unspoken tension that had suddenly taken root. In that moment, the quiet house seemed to tighten around them. Clara's patience, her steady observation, and her careful planning had all built to this precise point. Every subtle slight, every assumption of control, was about to meet its first undeniable consequence. Emily finally reached for the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as if she already sensed the weight it carried. Clara's gaze remained steady, calm, almost serene, but it held an intensity that made Emily pause. The kitchen, usually a place of mundane routine, now felt like a stage set for reckoning. Lucas leaned against the counter, watching, uncertain, sensing that something had shifted in the household's quiet order. Clara didn't speak. She let the silence do the work. The envelope, sitting prominently on the table, seemed to demand attention. Emily unfolded the paper carefully. Her eyes scanned line after line charges, notes, subtle records of entitlement and oversight. transactions she had assumed would go unnoticed. Every word was a reminder that her assumptions had been wrong. The house was not hers to control, and Clara was no longer a background character. Lucas said softly, finally breaking the tension. His voice trembled slightly, unsure how to react. Clara didn't answer him immediately. Her hands rested lightly on the counter, steady, precise, as if the physical act of touching solid surfaces reminded her that she was in control. Emily's eyes finally lifted from the envelope. I didn't realize, she began, but the words faltered. Clara's calm, unwavering presence filled the room, a quiet assertion that needed no argument. Daniel, standing quietly near the doorway, observed the interaction without a word. His presence reinforced the message. This was no impulsive reaction, no overblown confrontation. It was deliberate, controlled, undeniable. Minutes passed. The sunlight shifted across the kitchen floor, casting long shadows over the table. Clara finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. This house, this space, and the trust it represents are not negotiable. Every decision made without consideration has consequences. Emily swallowed, her lips pressed together. She had always counted on assumptions, but now those assumptions were unraveling before her eyes. Lucas looked between them. The reality sinking in Clara was no longer passive, and the envelope had confirmed what he had only half suspected. That respect was earned, not taken. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower outside contrasted with the tension in the kitchen. The moment was suspended, a turning point that would redefine the household dynamic. Clara's deliberate calm contrasted sharply with the subtle panic beginning to appear on Emily's face. Clara didn't need to yell, to demand, or to force acknowledgement. The evidence alone, the careful record in the envelope and the weight of her presence was enough. For the first time in months, the house recognized her authority. She let the words hang in the air, allowing Emily and Lucas to process. Daniel gave a quiet nod, acknowledging the subtle victory without speaking. Clara's eyes returned to the envelope, then to the laundry she had folded earlier. Every detail mattered, and every step had been deliberate. For now, no further confrontation was necessary. The message had been delivered. The balance had shifted. Clara had reclaimed what was hers, quietly but unmistakably. By late afternoon, the house had settled into a tense quiet. Emily sat at the counter, the envelope still in front of her, her hands resting limply on either side. Lucas hovered nearby, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Clara, standing near the window, watched the sunlight shift across the room, feeling the weight of the day settle into something final. Daniel had stepped back, letting Clara take the lead. She didn't need him to speak. His presence alone reinforced the unspoken authority she carried. Every corner of the kitchen, every carefully folded robe, every item in its proper place testified to her control and calm. Emily's eyes flicked repeatedly to the envelope, then to Clara. I didn't realize how much I assumed, she finally admitted, her voice small and hesitant. It wasn't an apology, not yet. But it was acknowledgement for Clara. That was enough. Recognition of her presence, her vigilance, and the line she would not allow crossed. Lucas leaned forward, finally finding his voice. Mom, I guess we never noticed everything you did for this house, he said quietly. Clara nodded slightly. She had noticed, of course. Every detail, every small oversight. Every moment they had tried to take her presence and generosity for granted. The envelope was still there on the table, now a symbol of clarity rather than confrontation. Clara reached out and placed it neatly back inside a small drawer, closing it carefully. The act was deliberate, calm-controlled. She had made her point, and the household understood that some boundaries were non-negotiable. Daniel gave a quiet, approving nod. "You handled it well," he said softly. Clara offered only a small smile. Eyes still scanning the kitchen, the living room, the small hallway that had once felt crowded with entitlement. Everything was now exactly as it should be, orderly, respected, and under her watchful eye. Emily, finally rising, straightened her posture. She avoided looking directly at Clara but understood the unspoken message. This wasn't overdramatic theatrics. It was measured, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. She had been reminded of the household hierarchy in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. Lucas, still uncertain, glanced between Clara and his sister-in-law. The tension had shifted subtly, imperceptibly, but undeniably. Clara's presence was no longer background noise. It was central, undeniable, and respected. The house remained quiet, save for the distant hum of neighborhood activity. Clara moved slowly, folding a towel, adjusting a chair small. Deliberate actions that reminded everyone present that control had quietly returned to its rightful place. The day was far from over, but Clara had drawn the first clear line. Outside, the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the porch. Inside, every small movement, every quiet glance, carried the weight of clarity. No yelling, no dramatic confrontation, just subtle, deliberate assertion of authority. And everyone in the house now understood that nothing would be taken lightly, and nothing would be assumed. The next morning, Clara woke early, as she always did. Sunlight spilled across the porch, warm and steady, just like it had been before the chaos began. The house was unusually quiet, but it wasn't hollow. It felt restored, orderly, respected, and undeniably hers. She moved through the guest house first, checking each room. The nursery corner that Emily had planned was still bare. The crib they ordered never arrived. The shelves were cleared, save for a small mug Clara had once bought for Emily that read. Maybe later, Clara smiled faintly and left it untouched. A quiet reminder of lessons learned, not grudges held. Clara packed the small essentials Emily and Lucas had left behind clothes. Toiletries, a few personal items, and placed them neatly in boxes by the front door. She didn't check every detail. There was no need. Respect, she knew, could only be earned, not extracted. Lucas peeked from the side, hesitating. "Mom, we'll figure things out," he said softly, almost apologetically. Clara nodded. "I hope so. But it starts with boundaries." Emily emerged from the guest house last, her expression subdued but calm. She paused at the driveway, eyes meeting Clara's for the first time. There was acknowledgement without words, recognition that the household dynamics had shifted, permanently and undeniably. Clara stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "You have 2 days to gather your things and leave the guest house. This is my home. Not a gift, not a favor, but a boundary." Emily opened her mouth, then hesitated. Lucas glanced at his sister, realizing there was no room for argument. Clara's calm authority left nothing to debate. 2 days later, the guest house was empty. Keys left neatly on the counter. No note, no apology. No thanks, and Clara didn't ask for one. Silence filled the space, but it wasn't emptiness. It was clean air after a storm, a space restored to clarity and control. Clara poured herself a fresh cup of coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, and stepped onto the porch. The sun was higher now, illuminating every corner of her home. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. Daniel stopped by later with a basket of fresh tomatoes and a joke about squirrels plotting against him. They laughed quietly together, the simple moments reinforcing the calm that Clara had worked so hard to reclaim. And as the sun dipped lower, Clara sat on the porch, coffee in hand, the house around her fully hers again. The silence was not lonely. It was earned. It was hers. She looked toward the driveway, imagining the next chapter ahead, and whispered softly to herself, "Until next time."